Welcome. Well, why don't we go ahead and get started? We want to leave plenty of time for Shelley, and then also provide some time for you guys to ask questions, and we want a good discussion. So we're excited about this being our fifth in the Planning Matters lecture series. My name is Andy Kitzinger. I'm the director of the University of Memphis Design Collaborative and serve on the program committee for ULI. But we would like to thank especially our planning series sponsor, the Hyde Family Foundation, that made this happen, and for their generous support. And the speaker series is something that is part of a larger culture of planning initiative that is with our ULI UMDC partnership. And so the speaker series is part of that, and we'll also talk about another part of it, urban plan. But the speaker series really is intended to expand our understanding of planning and talk about why it matters to us as individuals and why it matters to us collectively and locally. So the sixth in the series is November the 5th. Write that time down. November 5th, we've got Dr. Julian Eggleman, who's here, professor of urban environment policy and planning from Tufts University. He's an author and professor, so that'll be an exciting opportunity. He'll be talking about social justice and the environment in that session. So I mentioned that the speaker series is one part of this larger culture of planning initiative. Urban Plan is the other component, and Urban Plan is a national ULI initiative, and Memphis is the first city that has localized that. And there's these brochures out on the table, and it's a great opportunity for you or people in your office to learn more about the entire process and be engaged in an all-day workshop about decision making and public-private partnerships, and how the trade-offs are made in community development issues and development. And we've got a little short video that will introduce it.
Urban Plan workshops are highly interactive planning simulations that allow Memphians a hands-on experience in the fundamental forces that affect urban development. Using building blocks, a map, and a spreadsheet, participants work as competing development teams responding to a hypothetical RFP for the redevelopment of the blighted urban area of Elmwood, located in the fictitious city of Yorktown, USA. Each participant is assigned a real-life role as a site planner, or maybe a financial analyst, or even a neighborhood liaison, as the team wrestles with the goals of the RFP, such as removing blighting influences, generating tax revenues for the city, creating jobs, attracting retail businesses, meeting housing needs of mixed income groups, creating or preserving amenities, and protecting legally designated historic sites.
I think a lot of different types of people could get something from this process. Both people who are kind of in the field and that they can kind of try on another hat for size and see it from a different perspective, as well as someone who maybe isn't familiar with land usage or planning and development in general, and really kind of start at page one and learn all about the process from all different perspectives at one time.
After brief presentations to a mock city council comprised of ULI volunteers, the day culminates with the selection of the best proposal and ends with a case study presentation with an actual project in Memphis.
This thing can be useful to any community member because there is a need for development, especially in underserved communities, but for folks in those communities to feel as though they're part of the process and that the development it's not happening to them, I think that they will benefit from it. So from the people to practitioners, I think the urban plan is a very valuable opportunity.
To learn more about the urban plan workshops, visit our website.
Great. So we've got 3 urban plan workshops scheduled for this fall. We've got one in October, November, and December. So the October 10th is the next one, and it is those dates are listed. October 9th, I'm sorry, November 10th, and December 14th. So if you know, the registration for October is just opened up on the website. So we're grateful to have our speaker tonight, Shelley Poticha, in Memphis. Shelley leads the National Resource Defense Council's Healthy People and Thriving Communities program. And what it does is advance the strategies that create strong, just, and resilient communities. The National Resource Defense Council is a lead partner, as you may know, in the Spark initiative in North Memphis. But Shelley's got a long background of being at the forefront of great planning initiatives. She holds a Master's of City and Regional Planning from Cal Berkeley, and she's got a Bachelor of Arts from University of California, Santa Cruz. She was senior appointee in the Obama administration, where she held HUD's partnership. She led HUD's Partnership for Sustainable Communities, and she launched the Office of Sustainable Housing and Communities. And if you remember, the HUD partnership between HUD, Federal DOT, and EPA, that was pretty innovative. The first time that departments partnered together, and spurred a lot of grant opportunities for livable communities, and really taken a different global view. Their programs, grants funded several things in Memphis. The Choice Neighborhoods from HUD, which University Place was the latest grantee for that. The Sustainable Planning Grant for the Green Print was part of the programs. And then we received a Tiger Grant, as you remember, for the Main to Main project and the Harahan Bridge, Big River Crossing. So some great projects that really have advanced Memphis. Before joining HUD, Shelley served as president and CEO of Reconnecting America, and she also served as the executive director of the Congress for New Urbanism. So please help me welcome Shelley Poticha.
Good evening, everyone. Okay, I got it. It is really, really wonderful to be here. I'm really pleased to be here. I've been in Memphis maybe about 5 times. As you can hear from my bio, I'm more of a West Coaster. And so every time I come, I see new things. It's just really exciting and wonderful. And I'm learning about this place and the community and the culture, and it is a very, very special place. And it's also just a kind of microcosm of something I want to talk about tonight, which is just this, the enormous challenges cities are facing right now in terms of economic development and housing and the issues of climate change, as well as how can we really build trust with the people in our communities so that we're actually all really rowing toward the same goal. So I want to talk a little bit about that and my version of what sustainability means. There's a lot of talk right now out in the field about climate resilience. I know you're doing a new climate action plan. And one of the things that I've been really reflecting on over the last few years is just how we need to be thinking in a very integrated and comprehensive way. So let me talk a little bit about this, and I'm hoping we have time for questions, so please think of some. So I really do feel like our communities are in a bit of a crisis. In all the communities that I'm working in, I'm currently working on projects in about 45 cities across the US. There's always this really wonderful, healthy part of town, and then these parts of town that haven't received the kind of attention that they might need. And it really is dragging down, I think, the overall community, where disinvestment really is tough to overcome, where there's just a lack of jobs or the ability for people from throughout the community to actually access jobs is often a challenge. Increasingly, I'm seeing finally a conversation about the legacy of racism and how it's really affected our communities. I think that's really incredibly helpful, but it's also very hurt. It just brings out a lot of hurt. And the challenges of the communities that we live in and the health threats that many of our members of our communities have. And all of that is also exacerbated by the fact that we are having very extreme weather right now. These neighborhoods are not on a Mississippi River. They're on a creek system that overflowed. And what we're finding is that these heavy downpours can be just as impactful to communities as a river flooding or a hurricane. So these are some of the things that I think about when I think about Memphis. And I'm not trying to portray only a doom and gloom story here, but I do think that one of the challenges, one of the opportunities and one of the challenges of thinking about the future is to think comprehensively about the whole community and how public resources in particular may really need to go towards some of those places, the most challenging kinds of issues, in part because that's where the private sector is going to have the biggest challenge. But there's also this issue of how we talk about this complexity. And I've been really thinking about the basics of life. How the way that we plan our cities, where we put housing, how we invest in transportation, can actually be a big factor in the cost of living. And if we think about providing real transportation options for people, or we have programs that weatherize homes, it actually makes the cost of living more affordable for many people. We ought to be thinking about when we invest in infrastructure, that it actually generates jobs in our communities in a longer term way. And that all of the kinds of interventions that we might do, say, to lower energy bills, actually also reduce emergency room visits. I've been working on a project I mentioned to a couple folks in here called Energy Efficiency for All. And one of the things that I didn't really have a deep appreciation for was that when a building has loose windows and it rains or it's muggy and moisture comes in, it not only is more expensive to cool, but it also grows mold, which triggers asthma, which then takes kids to the emergency room or takes them out of school. There are all these connections that I think we ought to be looking at in order to find the strategies that really address the specific problems of our communities. I wanted to show you one example, just a tiny little example from Prince George's County, Maryland, where the county has just found themselves in a situation where every time there was a rainstorm, the streets were flooding. And they have basements there, so every time it rained, water would go into people's basements, and you can only afford to replace the carpet and get things cleaned out so many times. And so the county came up with this really incredibly smart strategy that, on the one hand, was framed as about green infrastructure. So the notion that building or making green spaces in our neighborhoods where when the rain falls, it can percolate back into the ground before it hits the street and then the stormwater system. It's a very low-cost, simple way of taking care of some of the problems of urban flooding. But what Prince George's County did is that they saw it as a community building strategy. And they enlisted the help of the churches in the county. These churches often have, really big parking lots for Sunday or big events. And they created an incentive program to take up some of the pavement and replace it with green space that could become both a place where water can really percolate into the ground before it hits the stormwater system, but it also creates, green and beautiful places in our neighborhoods. And they partnered with children's groups, primarily through the public school system, to learn about what are some of the plants that really are appropriate in this area, that capture and hold water more than others. And I think one of the most profound parts is that they saw the investment in green infrastructure and parks as a job opportunity. And Nikita, this gentleman here, this is a gentleman who has been running a kind of lawn maintenance business for many years. He has maybe one employee. And he banded together with a whole group of other owners of these very small businesses, and with the county's help, created a co-op so that they are now able to bid on county contracts. They're the ones that are doing the maintenance on the swales and the parks and the green spaces in this county. And what it's done is that it's really turned the whole notion of building a water treatment system into a community revitalization project. One of the other things that I think is so incredible about this work is that the county has also used the power of their procurement, their purchasing power, to buy the plants from local farmers. So they've actually contracted with local farmers to grow the plants that go into the green spaces. These gentlemen are the ones that actually maintain it. And for the first time, they have year-round income. They've generally been kind of a seasonal kind of business. So this has become both a kind of response to the reality that the storms in Prince George's County, where the Anacostia River is, are getting more intense, and their rain systems just can't accommodate the amount of water that comes down. But it also is a job program. It's an entrepreneurial economic development program, and it really is about supporting local people in the community. So it's just a food for thought kind of idea. The second thing I wanted to just focus on is Memphis 3.0, which, you know, I know we're here to talk about planning and kind of think about how Memphis can be, where Memphis should be in the next 5, 10, 20 years. And the Memphis 3.0 effort, I think, is a really incredible opportunity to set that course. And these themes are really inspirational. They can really be those sort of guideposts for going forward, and they can help be the kind of touchstone whenever there is an investment in the community. People in the community can ask, does it help us with these goals that we have? And that then becomes a touchstone, and it also becomes a rallying point for the community. I think one of the biggest challenges, though, is that we have to start breaking down traditional silos. Because what I'm starting to see is that a access to parks and green space intervention in a community can also be a job opportunity intervention, can also be a crime reduction intervention, a reducing blight and waste intervention, and a business investment kind of intervention. And I think the more that you think about the future being about, like whenever you invest $1, it should really lead to multiple positive outcomes. That's really the goal of making a more sustainable, prosperous, resilient community. The other thing that I would say is that, and it's maybe kind of radical, is just the importance of empowering people in our communities to truly be a part of the change. They're the ones that know that there isn't a grocery store in their neighborhood that sells fresh food that's affordable. Or they're the ones that can show you where the flooding happens when a big rainstorm comes, at a level of detail that the planners don't really all know about. It's those kinds of locally driven solutions that actually help make the strategies that come out of Memphis 3.0 to actually be embraced and supported by the community. And I think that this is just, I just want to kind of pause here for a moment, because I know that there's been a lot of community engagement in Memphis, particularly around Memphis 3.0. But I think that, and maybe this isn't what's happening here, but there are just too many communities where the public and private the decisions about where money is going to be invested are left to experts. I'm an expert. I don't need to make those decisions, I don't think, anymore. I think really we ought to open it up. We ought to bring people into the process of making decisions at the local level. And I think that that will help us avoid unintended consequences. So I want to talk about a cautionary tale. Many of you might have heard, have any folks visited the Atlanta Beltline? A few. So the Atlanta Beltline is a really innovative, creative project. It's taking a series of unused rail lines that kind of form a circle around downtown Atlanta and intersects with the MARTA subway, or transit system. And the notion of reclaiming this space and turning it into a community asset is just a game changer. It's really incredible. And it's become a rallying point, I think, for so many people in the community. And it's stimulated a kind of reinvestment that I think many folks in Atlanta never would have thought was possible. And lots of new housing units, great access to nature, just great programming around the Beltline that is really trying to respect the culture of the city. But the challenge is that it's really only in parts of the city. And there are other parts of the city that touch the planned Beltline that have really been left out. And that's where I think groups that do have a pulse on what people in the community really are concerned about are really important. This is along the Lee Street corridor, which is on the sort of south west side of Atlanta, of the Beltline. And they're really grappling with both the challenge of both attracting new investment into this area, but also being a little bit worried about investment. Most of the new housing that's along the other parts of the Beltline are very high-end housing. It has had the effect of raising property values, rents are rising, and that's a good thing. But many of the people who lived around the other parts of the Beltline can't afford to live there anymore. And so the Lee Street neighborhood is sort of conflicted. Like, on the one hand, they want this incredible, beautiful amenity. And on the other hand, it's a little daunting, because what if they don't get to live there anymore? So a group of local leaders called the Transformation Alliance came together, and their kind of reason for being, I guess you could say, is to bring a community viewpoint to the Beltline. And they're now actively engaged in coming up with positive, locally appropriate strategies that help ensure that as investments do come to the neighborhood, that it really reflects community values. This is a little bit of art by a local artist on the train station. And I think one of the things that is really exciting is that when they went and talked with neighborhood leaders, they found out that there really weren't very many places for kids to play that were safe. And so they partnered up with this group called Soccer in the Streets, which builds soccer fields and runs programs for youth that are both about learning the skills of soccer and teamwork and all of that, but they also are responsible for maintaining the facilities. So it's a very comprehensive program. And Transformation Alliance was able to secure an unused piece of transit agency property, so public property, in order for this site to be developed as a soccer place. And actually, the Spark project, which Andy mentioned a moment ago, provided the funding for them to be able to do the facilities on this site. So I'll talk a little bit more about this in a moment. But, the other thing that I think is really exciting about soccer in the streets is that under this play field is a big cistern. It's a big space for water to be collected when it rains. This is a neighborhood that has a lot of problem with urban flooding when it rains. And they decided to, collect that in this space. It wouldn't harm anybody, but it takes rainwater from a pretty large area. And what I love about this is that it is really emblematic of a great initiative that solves a whole bunch of local concerns. And that, to me, is really what sustainability is all about. Another kind of interesting initiative that they're working on right now is tackling the challenges of extreme heat. So, Atlanta does get pretty hot, and many people in the community have been just talking about the cost of energy, but also a lot of times when it gets hot, that's when the power system goes down. And if you don't have power, you can't run your air conditioner. And if you're elderly, that is a real health threat. So what they've done is that they have partnered with the city to put solar panels on fire stations and schools. And those fire stations and schools are now cooling centers when there is a heat wave. And they're open to anybody in the community, but they especially cater to the elderly because they are the ones that have really a high risk of exhaustion. And it's a pilot. I think one of the things that's really exciting about this experiment is that it not only, creates a place for people to go when there is an emergency, but it also reduces the energy bills for the city that pays the bills for the fire department. It's turning into a project that many people in the surrounding Lee Street neighborhood see as a great pilot because they want to look at the possibility of putting solar panels on their roofs because it is also one of those places where the cost of energy is just really out of bounds. So I bring these examples up because I think, listening to, engaging, empowering community members to be part of the solution to all of the challenges that are in our communities, but especially the challenges of making our communities more resilient, it's really critical. And it leads to stronger responses to local concerns. It builds trust and stronger relationships between government and the public. And I think it actually builds the kind of social bonds that make strong and resilient communities. And that's what the initiative that we talked about earlier, SPARK, Strong, Prosperous, and Resilient Communities Challenge, is really all about. This is a national initiative, and Memphis is one of the 6 cities that is part of the initiative. The others are Atlanta, Denver, Los Angeles, the Bay Area, and Chicago. Very, very different places, but all trying to really test and experiment and find new ways to, at the same time as we're investing in communities for community revitalization or for resiliency, we're also building, empowering, and building the wealth of community leaders so that they can be more a part of the solution. As was mentioned, North Memphis is the study area for this community. Building Memphis is sort of what we call the backbone organization, helping to support the work of the neighborhoods and the neighborhood leaders in this space. And it's a very new way of thinking about community change and looking at the kinds of strategies that are community driven and community empowered is really, I think, a work in progress, but something I think really worthwhile. One of the things that is very different about Spark than most other foundation-supported initiatives, and this effort is funded by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, the Kresge Foundation, the Ford Foundation, and the JPB Foundation, which are all in different ways also investing in other parts of Memphis. One of the things that's really different about this is that we have a pool of capital for projects in the study areas that we're working in. So it's a combination of funding to support the community-based organizations who are working with community leaders and a pool of capital that's around $60 million that will help jumpstart local projects and make sure that they really start to show the benefits in communities of this more integrated approach to community revitalization. So I'm going to close here, and I just want to say that we are in a really different time. I have been working in the field of planning for decades, and I have never seen such a confluence of positives, the real interest in people living in cities and living with culture and interacting with their environment, and at the same time, the challenges of these kind of disparities where parts of cities are really thriving and other parts are just not. And as you think about the future, as you think about the plan for the future, think about how to both ensure that the thriving parts of Memphis really continue to thrive, but also think about the places that haven't had the advantages of a concentrated effort. It is very hard to do. It is very, very hard to do. But I hope that in a few years, it's just going to be natural for the people of Memphis to really think in a more comprehensive way or in a comprehensive way about what the future potential is. Think about the connections between sustainability and economic development and community wealth building, and find ways to really empower and build the opportunities for people who live in those neighborhoods that have often been left out. So thank you very much. Really happy to be here, and I hope there are a few people who have some questions. Thank you.